Welcome to the Possibility Hub video series. I'm Carol Talbot, the creator and founder of the Possibility Hub, an advocate for awakening, encouragement, and creating opportunities for an expansion of awareness and consciousness. In this episode, John Paul Fischbach looks into his shamanic bag to discuss soul retrieval, what it is, why it's important, and how it works. Hello again, John Paul. Long time.
Hello.
And
Yes.
today we're going to talk about, in this episode, soul retrieval, which we hear a lot about in shamanic circles, and maybe people aren't aware of what it is, why you might need a soul retrieval, and from a shamanic perspective, how it actually works, how a soul retrieval would take place. So I'm just going to hand the baton over to you on that.
Well, I think the place to start is to talk about the two kinds of soul retrieval work. So one is a situation that can happen in your life where at a certain age, there's a division. So let's say, typically it happens in a situation of abuse, physical or sexual abuse, where there's a split at a certain particular age. So a young child. And the contract that you make to be on this planet is to pursue some particular lessons. So when something unforeseen like an abuse happens, there's a part of you that separates, and it's a protective measure that separates and says, wait a minute, this isn't what we agreed to. I'm out of here. Or I don't want to go further in this. So sometimes there's a soul retrieval that's an integration. So you would know that from NLP work.
Yes.
Where you have two parts. So that's the kind of the same idea, that you're looking for that part, that age. So if there's a dysfunction in your life, typically there's an integration of parts of a soul that have to happen. But what I'm more familiar with is where you get these fragmentations. So let's say that you've had the abuse, sometimes it's addiction, you've had a near-death experience, maybe intense rejection, or you have an abandonment issue, or you've had a particular shock. And there's just a piece that gets separated that says, wow, whoa, ah. So again, to avoid feeling that intense emotion and that intense pain, a part of the soul just splits off and it just hangs out somewhere. And depending on how big a piece this is, sometimes it's guarded. So you might have a guardian that's installed that's protecting that from coming back, because the soul piece is saying, I'm staying out here. I don't like what's going on over here.
I don't want to get hurt again, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
I'm going to hang out over here.
Yes.
Yep. It's a whole protection thing. So the experience when you sign up as a shaman, it's kind of one of the standard things that you do. So you do the psychopomp work and help spirits move on. You do ceremony work. You run sweat lodges, things like that. But soul retrieval is another one of those basic skills. And it used to be as simple. I mean, back in the day, if you fell off your bicycle, oftentimes a grandmother would grab you and she would whisper a little prayer into your soul to say, that's okay, you don't need to separate, it's just a little accident, it'll be okay. So she reassures the soul to go, nope, don't, that's not worth splitting off. So it used to be very common, an understanding that your soul was a multi-complex thing, and little pieces would split off if there was some sort of trauma that happened. So what I was trained to do is you enter an altered state. So I use drumming, and I go into a lower world journey to hunt for the pieces of your soul. So I start wandering around in your lower world, and I look for objects. And it's quite fun usually, because the objects can be anything. They can be a little doll, they can be a hair bow, they could be a particular sweater or jumper. Oftentimes I find a hairbrush, but that's a common one. And I find these and I put them in my basket in the vision, and then I bring them back. And then my job is to just surround you with as much unconditional love as humanly possible, because things aren't going to come back in a lack of love. So I encourage the client to start opening their heart and welcoming these things back, welcoming wholeness. So it's a bit of self-love, but then I just pump as much love into the person as possible and surround everything with love. to integrate these pieces back, to bring these fragmented aspects back. And then traditionally you blow them into a particular part of the body. So you ask the hairbrush, where does this need to live? And it might be a shoulder. And then that's of interest to the client, that the symbol or the whatever form it takes is a hairbrush. That may mean something, it may not. And the part of the body that it goes back into may mean something and it may not. And then it ends with a huge, self-love and big hug and rubbing those parts to integrate them. And sometimes if it's a particular wound, then there's instructions that you have to treat it like a wound, and you have to put a bandage on it, or you might have to put a piece of cloth around it or a scarf tied around it for a couple of days to get this thing to integrate. The important thing really is that you're welcoming it back. And there has to be a little agreement, because this piece left because something traumatic happened. And it's not going to come back unless you promise that you're going to look out for this, or that you're older now and you're wiser now and this probably won't happen again. But it's saying, I'm not coming. If you're going to do this again, I'm not coming back.
Yeah, so
I think one of them,
having had a sort of, maybe a disagreement with a friend, that friend's not going to come back unless there's kind of like forgiveness, apologies, and hugs all round. And it's like, okay, let's put that behind us. Let's start again. Let's be united again.
One of the most beautiful soul retrieval integrations I got to see was with a Bwiti shaman from Africa. And the shaman was working with a guy who had an addiction issue. And so when he went on the journey to find this part of the soul was really angry and said, I need to have a conversation with this guy. So the shaman facilitated this conversation with the guy, and the soul said, look, we have a lot of beautiful work to do, but you chose to go with drugs. That's not on. We can't do our work. And it was really angry, and they had this beautiful conversation. And the soul said, look, I'll come back, but you have to promise that we're going to do our work to bring love into the world. And it was just such a beautiful connection. And as far as I know, the guy never had any more drugs after that, because he realized that that was damaging to the soul.
And that really wasn't his true purpose. And then he probably considered, well, for what reason am I drinking or on drugs anyway? What am I running away from?
Yeah.
Now you say that it's, normally if people have had trauma, abuse, near-death experiences, or something dramatic happened, so that's highly likely that they have a piece of their soul missing, and a soul retrieval needs to take place. Some people have hidden past abuse or past experiences so well that they're not even aware. So I know from an NLP perspective, when we're sort of looking at parts integrations, the philosophy is we are whole, and yet have these fragmentations. And then what we may see manifest is that, one part of you says this, the other says no, the other says yes, part of you wants to do this, a part of you no. There's this kind of like, internal conflict. So people are not sure what it is. And that's usually, we identify that as two separate parts that need to see that they have the same highest purpose, yet, that they're creating this kind of like conflict inside is usually what we describe it as. Can that also happen in terms of people are not aware, as I said, that there's been abuse in the past, but they just feel there's this inner turmoil or inner conflict and they don't know what it's from?
Absolutely. So sometimes we think that the symptoms suggest a soul retrieval. So I go down to your lower world to find this, and I find a little girl sitting on a rock crying, or sitting in the forest crying. And so I have to get the little girl and I have to say, can you talk to me? And she'll say yes. And I'll say, how old are you? And she'll say, I'm 7, I'm 8, I'm whatever. And then I say, have you been here since that age? Yes. And then sometimes she can tell me what happened. Most of the time not. So then I have to end that, and I come back into this reality and say to the client, okay, there's a little girl just crying. I can tell you what she's wearing, and she's 7 years old. What do you have any memories of 7 years old? And quite often that's all you need. And they
Yes.
say, well, I don't know. And then suddenly then they're crying. So then, once everyone's got that open emotion, then you can go back in and retrieve that,
So
because there's then shared grief.
it's a participative experience with the person who's having the soul retrieval. Okay, and like in that example, it was just one part of the soul. Does that also link in thoughts that were coming to mind that is it a soul retrieval, or are there entities or something like that, or is that going into a different area?
No, not entities. The only time I've ever encountered any kind of like entity is that piece of the soul has been willfully separated and given to a guardian. So there was one time that I went in and I could see this egg. It was like, do you know what Ukrainian Easter eggs look like? With
No.
they're all painted in
Oh, yeah.
incredible designs. But yeah, so it was a Ukrainian Easter egg, and this person had a Ukrainian background, and the egg was being guarded by a dragon, and there was no way I could pick it up. I saw it. It was like, no, you can't have this. You can't have this. So again, it was, I have to get your permission. You have to give me permission to get this egg. So in that instance, I'll say to the client, okay, we've got this Ukrainian Easter egg, but it's being heavily guarded. Can you give permission for me to have it? And then the dragon moved off to the side and looked down and said, all right. So I picked up the egg and brought it back. And that was significant to the client because it was the death of her grandmother.
Mm.
And when her grandmother died, she just couldn't accept that. She couldn't accept death. It was wrong. It was wrong. I don't like this. I don't like that she would leave me. I don't like that my grandmother is no longer accessible to me. That's not right. So that was what she needed to accept.
Do you also find that, there's often the term people use is the soulless ones, where, the whole soul has gone. It's almost like the person's not there anymore.
Totally. That's most common in, really intense abuse cases where the dissociation is so complete that you're living a personality that you've learned will get you through life, but it's not you, or addiction. And in that case, when you do the soul retrieval, it's quite extraordinary. The one that I'm remembering now is that I went into the lower world and everything just turned into this incredibly bright, blinding white light. I couldn't see anything. It was so strong. And it was just this whole blinding white light. And I said to the guides of the lower world, help me understand what this is. And they said, well, this is the person's soul. This is the whole soul, this huge white light. So then I shrunk it down to a manageable orb that I could work with. And then I brought this whole glowing white ball of soul back and blew it into the person. And it was a fundamental shift. It was huge, completely new personality.
I would imagine you had to continue for a couple of months supporting that person in other ways to reintegrate, and not just this person, but with some of your clients, to help them literally reintegrate and become who they truly are, as you're bringing in these new facets. Because, it's, if you think as we learn and we grow and evolve, people come and go in your life, and there's, certain times where you think you've, changed or shifted, and that means that the people around you no longer fit. So can you imagine, literally bringing your soul back, being who you are meant to be, and seeing the world differently, hearing the world differently, feeling the world differently? It's going from being the walking dead to the walking alive, really, isn't it?
Yeah. No, there was lots of times where she needed me to have a conversation with this soul because it was, to me, it was like a walk-in experience, where there's a whole nother soul that takes over running the body. It was kind of like that. But then we landed on breath work, and we did lots of breath work sessions, and then that really helped her and her true soul fuse together seamlessly.
Oh, that must have been really beautiful. Now, there was something else you were saying there that brought to mind, as we said, if a part of the soul from abuse disappears so that it's protected, and then what's left almost creates a personality to cope. This is where we get multiple personality disorders. So would you say, the majority of people who are diagnosed with multiple personality disorder, really what's going on is fragmentation of the soul?
I would say that, absolutely. And back in the day, that's how that would have been treated. Back in the time of our deep ancestors, that is how that would be treated. That would be treated as a spiritual problem, not a mental problem. It's a spiritual problem.
Yes. So that's the difference of the old ways and the indigenous tribe ways and the working with the ancestors of healing and transformation, rather than now labeling you have this, or you have multiple personality disorder, or what about schizophrenic?
Well, schizophrenia, to me, in my experience, which is very limited, but the couple of clients that I've had that have been diagnosed with schizophrenia, one was actually a portal, that he was a portal. That's his sole contract, was to be here and be a portal for other spirits to come in.
Oh, okay.
So if you were more balanced, you would say, well, I'm a channeler and I channel these common spirits. But because he was a portal, not just a channel, they just would come through. So it was about helping him manage that ability, that was his gift, was to be a portal. And so it was learning to manage that and say, okay, this is what, and you can choose to have that be open or be closed. So he got a chance to just close it for a while and just be himself. So he could figure out what that was. And then he could go through the experience of opening the portal and being taken over, be the portal, and then have it. So it was about him learning to manage that gift. But again, back in our ancestors' time, if that was your gift, people would acknowledge that, and you would have been helped with understanding that that's what you are.
Yes, and
that you're not
as well, rather than blind and put on drugs. And yes. So this is the gift of taking a more holistic view rather than just either the allopathic view or this view. It's looking at the bigger picture, our multidimensionality of all of who we are as well, rather than just the physical form or the emotional body or the mental body, but understanding the totality of who we are and the experiences that we've come in and chosen. Also wanted just to talk about walk-ins as well, because I guess, from what you've just said about this person, as a portal, he's allowing almost walk-ins to come in for a certain period of time and then leave, come and go and experience and go. However, are there times when the soul completely leaves and the agreement is for another soul to come in, a walk-in, so to speak?
Yep. So I've encountered quite a few walk-ins. So I'm pretty good at recognizing this. I hear the story, I'm like, I think we're talking about a walk-in now. And it's interesting that the person, once I present that concept, quite often the client will say, well, that's really weird because I don't have any memories of me before the event. So quite often it's an accident. If it's a severe accident, a near-death experience, and the body's really wounded and, kind of a mess, and the soul that's been running the show goes, sorry,
I'm done.
Fixing all of this, no, that's not my thing. So another spirit says, well, okay, I'll mend the body. I'm happy with that. I'll come in, I'll mend the body, and then carry on. So there's a soul exchange that happens. And I remember one lovely, lovely woman who was a fellow shaman. She was in a terrible car accident. And she woke up after a coma in the hospital, and her son was sitting there. And her son looked at her, looked deep in her eyes, and said, "Who are you, and what have you done with my mother?" And
I
so
have,
the
I
spirit
have heard
explained.
that before from people who've had near-death experiences, and when they come back, it's the child that recognizes, or rather doesn't recognize. It's like, no, there's a shift, because
Yeah,
there also has to be a period of time of merging as well, doesn't there?
yeah, yeah. But again, you and I have, not to name names, but you and I have a couple of friends who have had this experience when they were little, and the exiting soul just went, well, wait a minute, this is going in a direction that isn't part of my purpose. Because things happen, right? We have free will. Things can happen that aren't on the plan, and another soul said, no, it's okay. I would like to work on this particular situation. That is something I'm looking to work on. So in my understanding, it's part of your larger soul group. You don't get some random, they're not looking at the want ads saying, body available. So it's part of your soul group that goes, no, no, that's a lesson I need to work on. So I'll jump in and drive from here.
Okay, so tell us more about soul groups. How do you define that?
The best thing I can do is a kind of a metaphor. So you know how an orange gets created with all the segments that grow up. So you've got a segment of the orange.
Yes.
So let's say that all the segments are each a soul group. So there's the whole unity, the whole orange, but then there are all these segments. And as the orange grows, more segments come in. So there can be more soul groups that are part of this big unity. But then if you open that, there's all those little juice sacs.
Yes.
And those are all little souls. So they're bound together in a soul group, but there's many little individual souls that are within there. And all the lessons that you would need to become a creator are housed in the big orange. And let's say you're working on a particular, all the people in that group are working on unconditional love, or they're working on manifestation of form, or they're working, so each group will have a particular thing that they're going to become absolutely perfect at. So if we're saying I'm all about, understanding unconditional love, then every one of those little juice sacs is working on one of the lessons of unconditional love. So that once everybody gets all those lessons, then you've got that whole segment that says we're now, our unconditional love soul group learning is complete.
Isn't it wonderful when you start to consider our multidimensionality and the connection that we have, and to embody more of who we truly are? That, we're not single, separated beings. We are, multidimensional collectives, and, nourishing ourselves with the wisdom and the learning from the collective. It really, and even with what we're talking about today with soul retrieval, bringing those parts together to be more of who you truly are, to embody your full self.
Yeah.
And you share, I love the stories you've shared of the watching the shaman in Bawiti, and with this guy, and the soul saying, having a little bit of a tantrum and argument, and I'm not coming back unless you change your ways. What are some of you said this is one of the first things you learn in shamanism. It's in your toolbox. It's one of the first go-to work. If you're going to work with somebody, it's like, well, let's get all the parts together, let's get the whole soul here. So what have been, in all your years, some of the really impactful ones? I mean, I love the story of where the soul wasn't there at all, and you had to compact the light to bring it in, and literally bringing someone back to life. Give us a couple of other wonderful examples that have been such a, you've seen the light go on in people just so beautifully.
The one of my favorite things is when you get all the pieces together. So in a particularly standard one, so let me explain. The severe traumas are rare. I mean, not all of us have severe trauma that is soul integration. A lot of us, it's just little things that happen. You got disappointed. I work a lot in theater. So a lot of actors who didn't get that role that they wanted, or they got rejection. there's little bits and pieces that break off because you don't want to deal with that pain. You're in a situation where you can't actually soothe and integrate the pain, so it splits off. So you've got these little pieces hanging around. So most commonly, when you've got a person without huge trauma, there's just little bits and pieces. So one of my favorites is I went down to the lower world. It was an actor, and she was just at a kind of frustration with the industry and feeling like, oh, I just can't possibly do this anymore. It's like, and it was that she'd gotten to, her little recycle bin, her little garbage bin of rejection was full. So we needed to empty the bin because in theater, as your life as an actor, you're going to have rejection, but it hurts. Rejection hurts. You can't pretend it doesn't hurt you. So her bin was just full. So I went down to the lower world, and there was this lake, and washing up off the lake was all of these bits and pieces. Broken toys, they were books, they were keys, there was a keychain, there was a rabbit's foot. I can't remember all the things, but they were washing up against the shore. The waves were bringing them up, bringing them up. So I looked at this detritus on the beach, and I started putting them all in the basket. And I got them all in the basket, and I thought, this is a lot. There was probably, a couple of dozen things. And I said to the guides down there, I said, surely we're not going to return all of these to the body. And they said, no, but you have to, they just have to be healed. So they needed healing. So I said to the actress, I said, look, there's a big pile of stuff. And she said, well, like, what is it? And so I said, well, there's this little rabbit's foot keychain. They're like, oh, I know that rabbit's foot. That was what my keys were on when I had this particular car when I lived in this particular city. And I said, well, does that represent something to you? And she said, well, that was one of the tougher times. She said, that was a time when I was trying to make a shift into doing commercial work, and it just wasn't happening. I just auditioned for everything and didn't get anything. I'm like, oh, so it seemed that was the thing. And I said, well, I think I've got a basket of all of the rejections. And she said, oh, well, let's just get rid of all of that. I mean, it just goes with the territory. So I said to the spirits in the lower world, what can we do with this? And they said, well, fling it out into the lake really far so it can't wash up on the shore again. So I just flung it really hard, all the way as far as out into the lake. And then it sank to the bottom of the lake. And the lake and the water helped integrate it. So when we came out of the session, she said, oh my God, I love being an actor. I'd forgotten how much I love it. I just love doing this. I love the work. I know this is my gift. It's so good. I just feel that that's renewed now. My love of the theater, my love of acting is renewed. I don't know what we did, but I feel like I just want to go audition again, and I want to keep doing this. I'm like, well,
wonderful. And I love the metaphor of, the bin is full. And it kind of brought to mind, Carlos Castaneda in his books talks about his experiences with Don Juan Matus, and they talk about recapitulation, that when you have an experience with another person or certain experiences, that experience and person takes energy from you, but you're also it's vice versa as well. It takes your energy and you take its energy. And so as you grow older, all your energy is gone on all these experiences, and you've got other people's energy with you. And I'm thinking about, in relationships, when relationships come to a close, and people talk about cutting the cord, cutting the ties. But again, if you've been in a powerful, intense relationship, your energy has been invested in that person and vice versa. So this also brings back to reclaiming, all the missing energy, emptying the bin and reclaiming the energy. And that's exactly what this client had. It's like her energy lifted. It's like, no, but I do love acting. This is what I'm born to do. How lovely. Yes.
Yeah. No, it's really beautiful. And quite often when I blow the thing back into the body, there's a huge smile and a laugh that emerges, or a sense of tickling. But again, it's that sense of love. It's that sense of self-love. It's like, okay, we live in this incredible incarnation where shit happens, pain happens. So it's self-love. It's about rubbing that wound and go, oh yes, I'm sorry, that hurt. We'll kiss it and it'll be better. I mean, there was something to kiss it and make it better.
Yes.
That says you don't need to separate. It's okay. This just happens.
So
Give it some love.
I'm sensing that this a soul retrieval is something that everybody should go through almost. I'm not saying every month or maybe every year, but every couple of years. It's like you need to almost like reclaim who you are, empty the bin if the bin is full. So how do people go about this? I mean, does it have to be in person? Because if you're communicating with them and then you're going to their lower world to pick up the pieces, does it have to be done in person?
Well, it's one of the things in the shaman toolkit that I don't know how to do over Zoom,
Oh,
because
really?
the whole blowing it back into the body
Yes.
is in my training, it's such an integral part of that I don't know what the equivalent is. I know that some practitioners guide you to do it. So they take you in a light trance into the lower world. They surround you with all the protection you require, but then you go find these bits and pieces. So I know that some people do that. And I think if you can do that, then if you go find them and then integrate, put them back in your own body, I think that's a possible thing. The way that I was trained, though, it's we do that for you because we don't have the investment.
Yes.
It didn't leave us. So it's easier for us as, a witness to go find these bits and pieces, because I don't have any judgment around it.
No, and also to be the go-between.
Yeah.
If there needs to be some negotiation to coax a part back, or like the one who was like, no, I'm not coming. So that's a really beautiful gift to be able to offer someone to become, truly whole, to be more of who they are, less of who they're not, and to bring all of their being back into the present, to live more fully. What a wonderful, wonderful experience, John Paul. So thank you for sharing. Is there any advice that you'd give to people in terms of the way that they would look at themselves in terms of identifying, I think I need to, have a soul retrieval and start bringing more of myself into my being?
I think it's any of those sensations you have that says, I can't, is that kind of the bin is full. Like, oh, I can't do that again. I can't possibly do one more of, I can't possibly put myself out again. Then yes, then there's obviously some work that needs to be done. And if there's blackouts, if you have a blackout period where you're like, I can remember a lot about my life, but in this period, I don't know, or there's oftentimes it's a particular grade. So in recapitulation work, one of the things that you do is to say, let's start going through your childhood. Grade 1, who was your teacher? Do you have any memories? And you go through and there'll be a blackout period. You're like, wow, grade 5, I don't remember anything. Probably there was some little, and it could have been a little trauma. It's pain avoidance is why this happens.
Yes, and interesting you say that. Again, in the darkroom when I was going through recapitulation, it was actually quite strange that towards the end of the experience, when I thought I'd been through everything, certain people or situations would come into my mind that I couldn't believe that I had actually forgotten. And I couldn't believe that that person had not come up sooner because they had played such a pivotal role. And it was really digging the depths. It was almost like those experiences said, okay, we'll come back in now, to be cleared, rather than they'd been really pushed aside. So that was very insightful and quite incredible to me. And even now, a few weeks out of darkroom, experiences I'm reminded of that had been completely out of my awareness, completely. So,
there's a little fragmentation that happened. So, so recapitulation work is soul retrieval work.
Yes.
Soul integration work. I know that for me, one of the things that Iboga does for me is that integration piece. So very similar to what you said. Sometimes in Iboga, Iboga shows me images of people or moments and runs a little film and going, can we let go of this one? Can we integrate this one? You know, are you okay to?
Yeah. Yes, yeah, that is very true. Iboga is such a, I always look at it as a complete mind defrag, you know, and emptying the bin, a big empty of the bin. Yes, that's what I.
Yeah, so I think that we all need to do that. I think whatever method works for you, I think in terms of spiritual well-being, you know, you need to empty the bin.
Yes.
So it's an important, I mean, it's part of spiritual well-being, spiritual upkeep. Because where does that energy go? It's just hanging around. So clear it.
Exactly. Even from a feng shui perspective, if there's clutter internally and clutter externally, I mean, the two mirror. So it's clearing space. Let's leave it. So John Paul, once again, a wonderful conversation. How do people get in contact with you?
The best way is through my website, which is eagleheart.com.au. That's really the best. And everything is there, and that you can email me through that site.
Thank you once again for sharing your experience, wonderful metaphors, your expertise, and telling us more about Soul Retrieval. Thank you for being part of the Possibility Hub. Thank you.
My pleasure.